Hello everybody and welcome to today's video. We are talking about World of Tanks Blitz today, and the reason that we're doing it is because the game has just released on Nintendo Switch. World of Tanks has been around for 10 years now, which is quite the achievement, and as part of the celebrations that have been going on, the developer has launched Tanks Blitz on the Switch. Now, Tanks Blitz is a very kind of pared down version of the full World of Tanks experience, which has been so popular on consoles and PC over the years, but it is a very nice kind of bite-sized version of World of Tanks. You have up to 7 tanks aside, each battle lasts 7 minutes, and it's over quite a small map. This was originally developed for mobile platforms, for iPhone and whatever, and I have been playing it on and off pretty much since it was released, which I know sounds strange because I've been critical of military shooters on my website and this channel in the past, and I do realize that this is a military shooter in effect as well, but we will get into why World of Tanks is a little bit more palatable to me shortly. What I will say up front though is I'm not going to review this game because it is free to play. There's no reason to spend money on it if you don't want to. You can go and check it out for yourself for nothing, and I never feel, very rarely do I feel the need to review a free-to-play game because it's just something that people don't need advice on. You don't need a critic to say, hey, you know, this game's great, check it out, because you can just go and do it yourself if you spot it. So in the absence of doing that, what am I going to do with this video? Well, what I would like to do first up is still suggest you go to digitallydownloaded.net and its promotion, but at the same time there is a reason for it. There is an interview that I've just published on the site which is with one of the senior people in the World of Tanks history team. I was able to spend about an hour chatting to this guy about how Wargaming, which is the developer publisher of World of Tanks, has seen its role in terms of depicting conflict in video games, because my problems with most military-based games is the fact that it is the way that they depict conflict, and it's particularly with relevance to real-world conflicts. I'm not so fussed about the Call of Duties that go into space and whatever, because that's a bit of fun nonsense in most cases, but when it is a World War II based game, for example, I become very critical of the way that Call of Duty does that. And the reason I do get critical is because I think that it's really important that we remember war for what it actually is, and it's critically important that we remember war the way that it happened. Even Call of Duty knows this, because with their most recent game, I think it was about 2 weeks ago now, they started to try and promote it as those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. They use that kind of classic truism to describe their own game, which is pretty nonsense because Call of Duty is very good at forgetting what actually happened in history. And the reason that they do forget about the history in their stories and whatever is pretty, from an entertainment product point of view, is pretty obvious. It's because a lot of stuff happens in war which it's not entertaining, and we're not just talking about the deaths, we're talking about how the soldiers behave between battles, we're talking about the political environment that leads to warfare, we're talking about any number of things that happen, and to actually depict those in video games would make the game much less entertaining, and certainly would take a lot of the heroism out of war, which is in the developer's best interest to make people invested in the game, is to make it a very heroic kind of experience. So that's why Call of Duty kind of papers over what happened in the real history, but I think that is dangerous, because that does become very much like propaganda. And I have made that link in many articles and videos in the past. You can go and check those out for my full thoughts there. This video isn't here to rag on Call of Duty, but the point is, that is the problem that I have with those kinds of games. World of Tanks is a little bit different, and we go into that in the interview that I have on the site. They definitely understand that conflict is a subject that needs to be taken seriously, and the reason that World of Tanks doesn't have a narrative, doesn't have those kinds of it doesn't take a position or anything like that, is simply because they don't believe that their game is the right game to do that, and that's why we'll never see a single player single player World of Tanks, and I think that's for the best. What they do, and why I think that this game actually kind of works, is that they are meticulous in how they depict the tanks themselves. So they have a full research team. They go to museums. They spend months and months and months of time actually researching and designing these tanks so that they are as close as possible to the real thing. And while you can say that might be a little bit excessive, since people aren't going to be looking at the individual nuts and bolts on these tanks, what it does do is ground the game in some kind of real history. Once you've grounded the game in a real history, you can then start to encourage people to go out and learn more about the history. And let's face it, tanks are pretty cool bits of machinery. They're fascinating in their terms of their raw power. When you actually see a tank up close, the size and scale of it, and the destructive potential of those things is really kind of mesmerizing, awe-inspiring, and a little bit intimidating. I'm a very anti-war person, as everybody knows, but when I see a tank, I am still fascinated by it. I still have to go up and I have to check it out. It's the same. I've been on to ex-battleships that they've moored in harbours and whatever, and they've turned into kind of floating museums so people can see what the experience is like being on a battleship. And it's the same thing. There is something very fascinating about military equipment, and World of Tanks really aims to kind of drive that interest in the machinery itself. So once you are then interested in the machinery, that's the point where you start to want to learn a little bit more perhaps, and that's where you might be inspired to go to a museum, or you might be inspired to pick up a book and learn about these tanks and whatever. And Wargaming.com has done a very good job. It's just Wargaming, isn't it? Wargaming has done a very good job in actually creating little documentaries about how they made the tanks, and they actually show you footage of them going along to the museums and all that kind of stuff. So they make that effort to be historically accurate about the tank designs very clear, and in doing so they give you little pointers about where you can go to learn a little bit more about these tanks. Once you've learnt about the tanks, then it would be likely that you're a little bit more interested in learning a little bit more about the context in which those tanks are used, and that's where you'll start to learn about the war itself. So World of Tanks doesn't take place in any realistic battlegrounds. These are all kind of maps that have been custom designed to look like World War II combat maps, but or combat areas, conflict areas, but not actually be accurate depictions of them. So it's not aiming to recreate, key battles that happened within the context of World War II. But what they do again is they encourage you to look at this as an example of, I guess, the aesthetics of World War II and what it may have looked like before all the deaths started to happen. And from there you might want to go and learn a little bit more about what actually happened in the war. You may want to learn about the actual battles and the way that these tanks were actually used in conflict. And that is where you'll get to the point then that you start to learn about the history. So you'll come into it with an interest with the tanks, the machinery, the engineering, and the kind of innovation the industrial innovation that a war of the scale of World War II drove. And let's not forget that there was a lot of advancement, a lot of research, a lot of amazing work which has had non-military applications that went on as a result of World War II. As a social and cultural thing, it's a fascinating story to follow, and we should all, once again, learn a lot more about World War II and the full range of implications and what it did to our society and history. And yeah, like I said, you're inspired to learn all of this through a simple interest of the tanks. It then broadens out into an interest about a lot more. And I've seen this myself. I already knew a lot about World War II. I haven't been inspired to start going to tank museums because I've already been to a few anyway since playing World of Tanks, but I have had that experience with other games. For example, Samurai Warriors 3, which was my first Warriors game, as silly as it sounds, because Warriors games are famous for being over the top and quite comedic in tone. But Samurai Warriors 3 really hit me at a time where I was just starting to become interested in a broader range of things about Japan. I was still newly married and my wife's Japanese, and I was starting to learn about her culture at a much deeper level than just, oh, I like anime and games. So when I started to play this game, I found out that, these are all obviously real history figures, which I never had the opportunity to learn about before. I started learning about them and their military exploits, the battles that they participated in and whatever. And from there, I started to learn a lot more about the culture at the time, what Sengoku Japan was like, what the regular people were like. I started to read books about the period, and I have a much, much broader understanding of Sengoku Japan and what it actually meant to the development of the country now as a result. And on top of that, I've become much more interested in a wide range of Japanese histories that aren't just necessarily related to the games that I'm playing. And I think that World of Tanks has a very similar potential for people. They'll come in, they'll have a favourite tank, they'll start to read about that tank, they may try and go and see that tank if they ever get a chance to be in a city which has a museum which has one of those tanks on display. And that's a learning opportunity. So for me, this is where World of Tanks does a great job that Call of Duty doesn't necessarily do. Call of Duty is really kind of, it pretends to be historically accurate, and it doesn't encourage you to go and learn more about the history because it wants you to think that it is historically accurate and it is telling you about the history. I've seen a lot of people that are fans of Call of Duty, that World War II one, who are absolutely convinced that the game is based on some kind of real history and they got something authentic out of it. And because of that, they don't need to go and pick up a book because they've already learnt about it. That is a problem because Call of Duty is revisionist history. It is definitely not indicative of the behaviour of the American soldiers through World War II. That light and the darkness stuff is pure propaganda that we've seen every other military ally and opponent express, and it's a definite problem. But World of Tanks doesn't do that. It doesn't try to convince you that it itself is a real take on history. It gives you the tanks and the basic knowledge about the engineering, and then leaves you to go and learn for yourself, or encourages you to go and learn for yourself with the full support of the company itself about all of this stuff. So yeah, fascinating stuff. Definitely recommend just download this thing, give it a go on Nintendo Switch. It's quite a fun game, 7 minutes a piece per battle, so it's not a time investment by any means, and it's just well made. So on that note, I'll wrap up this video here. I've ranted on enough about history, I guess. Thanks as always for tuning in. Do let me know your own thoughts on World of Tanks, the way that history is depicted in video games, all of that stuff. I'm very keen to talk about it. It is a topic that I find very sensitive, but also very interesting and very worth discussing. So I would love to hear your own thoughts. Otherwise, stay tuned for more this week. We've got more videos coming. Can't tell you what just yet, but it'll be fun. And yeah, I hope you've all been well. Thanks as always for tuning in. Hit the like and subscribe button if you enjoy my videos, because then you'll get them as I publish them. Please do consider backing me on Patreon, because that helps me to continue to grow this website and channel and all that stuff. And yeah, otherwise we'll see you at the next video.